before we get started, we're going to expose some relationships. How many women in this room have been in touch with Ivanka and her team on these kinds of issues in the past? Look at that, see? There's definitely a sprinkling here. Cathy, describe your experience.
Yes, Ivanka and I met talking about our family leave policy for men and women, but up to 16 weeks for any family illness matter, parental leave, and worked with some at the White House since then.
And Marillyn?
On workforce development, we just recently were in Detroit on computer science education with the President's memorandum of getting money to our schools in that arena, so a couple of times on workforce development.
So Ivanka, this was such an abstract issue for you. You were concerned before joining the White House, but it was fairly abstract. Now that you've been there, you've been on the ground, you've talked to these women, as well as other CEOs, other business leaders, share with us something that strikes you as new and interesting about the needs of the workforce.
Well, it's such a critical topic, and one of the things that I would hear time and time again from the many CEOs, several of which are and many of which are in this room today, two of which are right up here on the stage, was the fact that they have vacant jobs that they're unable to fill, in large part to the skills gap that exists in our country, and it's growing. Today, we have 6 million vacant jobs that Americans are unable to fill and companies are having trouble hiring for. So this represents both an enormous challenge, but a tremendous opportunity to make sure that the education being taught to our students in our classroom aligns with the skill sets for the jobs that are in demand today and will be increasingly in demand in the modern economy. And I think when we think about workforce development, it's multi-pronged, because obviously it has to start with our youngest students, K through 12. We have to think about it through the context of post-secondary education, technical school, community colleges. There's really tremendous opportunity there, and industry has led the way on this front through unbelievable collaborations that have deeply inspired me, and we've looked to amplify. So we just signed an executive order in June, very early into the administration, to really unleash industry and enable industry trade organizations to come together to form apprenticeship opportunities and to further create this type of collaboration. So there's so much that we can do in leveraging the needs of industry, the skills that they're looking for, with the ecosystem that we have through our schools, our post-secondary schools, our colleges, and of course through government as a vehicle to scale it. So there's tremendous opportunity.
And of course, when you want to engage the entire workforce, you don't want to leave behind rural America. You don't want a workforce that's just led by the children of Silicon Valley. You want people who weren't just born here.
And technology really has the opportunity to democratize in terms of geographically where people are located. We're very focused on rural communities and inner cities, which is why every president has the opportunity to direct their Department of Education in terms of their priorities. And 2 weeks ago, the president directed the Department of Education to prioritize STEM education with a particular focus on computer science, which we think is really a foundational skill across all industries, not just the tech industry, foundational across all industries. And Marillyn has been so supportive in her private sector contribution to this effort. But we also directed the Department of Education, as they make these funds available to every school district in the country who applies for them, a minimum of $200 million annually, that they design programs with diversity in mind, gender diversity and racial diversity, because that's critical, especially as you think about STEM.
And you also have to think about, we also want to think about immigrants. We've got this population of dreamers who, who's a Hamilton fan? I always say immigrants, they get the job done. I love that line from Hamilton. But we do have the question of the dreamers, 800,000 young people, most of whom are under 25, most of whom are women. What role should the dreamers be playing in a future workforce?
Well, I think that this is a very complicated issue that needs a long-term congressional fix. I personally am of the opinion, and The president has stated this, that we have to figure out a good solution that protects these innocent people, many of whom were brought to this country as children. But there has to be a long-term fix, and it cannot be bandaged over at a presidential level through another executive order that can be rescinded by a subsequent administration. And I think when the senator was speaking about the need for comprehensive immigration reform, I think that is the right approach, because our system is flawed and it is not equipped to handle the challenges, and our visa program is deeply flawed. We're not retaining the best talent for the jobs that we need, and that has to fundamentally be reconsidered.
So Marillyn, I want to bring you into the conversation because the defense industry has been very much at the forefront of innovation, historically, in modern history, DARPA on down. When you look at trying to create and maintain a nimble workforce, what worries you the most?
Well, what worries me the most is the pipeline of STEM people coming into STEM talent. I mean, that worries me the most because as a company, we're very much about helping governments protect their citizens. We are working on advanced discovery. We're working on innovation. I mean, we're a global innovator. And to the extent that we don't have enough talent that's coming in through science, technology, engineering, and math, that's the thing that worries me most. And it's not just about Lockheed Martin. I mean, we have today about 50,000 scientists and engineers and IT professionals, and we have 16,000 suppliers that have many, many more. It's important for our company, but even the World Economic Forum has identified of the top 5 issues that companies are citing is the fact that they don't have adequately trained talent for the jobs that exist today. What we also know is that the technology, as you mentioned in your remarks at the outset, is changing exponentially. It is rapidly changing. The digital transformation that's happening across our economy, all of the jobs are changing at a rapid rate, and we've got to keep up with that. And the way to keep up with it is to get our students trained in science and technology and engineering and math, not just for college, but in high school to technical schools to apprenticeships, all the way into our workforce. So that's the area that I'm most concerned about. We spend a lot on it as a company. We spend our philanthropic dollars that direction. We're engaged in the classrooms. We're engaged with schools at all levels. But I think it's across every sector in this economy that needs to be focused on that, from government to business to nonprofits. We all have to come together around this issue.
So I know computer science is the focus, and the two of you were involved in the initiative to bring more computer science to classrooms, and only half of high schools have computer science programs. But
less than half of high schools have a single
schools.
course, and disproportionately there's limited access in rural America and our inner cities.
Yeah.
So it's a big problem, but it's one prong of the larger workforce development problem, and thinking about what the future of work is, and then backing from there into what skills will enable the next generation to succeed.
And you wonder if it's computer science, do we need to look beyond that, Marillyn? I mean, what are the jobs that are going to be there in 5, 6, 7 years that we can't even imagine right now? And then what jobs won't be there?
Well, I'll just tell you, there's some jobs today that we're out seeking candidates for. Things like autonomy engineers, those that are working on making things unmanned, whether it's aircraft or undersea vehicles or things of that nature, or helping with the human-to-machine interaction that happens in the workplace. We are, as we look across all of our manufacturing facilities, advanced manufacturing, we need people that have the ability, the skills, and the technical skills in order to deal with precision tooling, to deal with advanced manufacturing capabilities. So it's across the board on that side. If you think about future jobs, I mean, all of the data, which is so important, the data analytics activity that we need to have talent to address. We're working on technology with sensors. You have sensors in virtually everything. So we need people that come in with sensor engineers or radio frequency engineers. There's a whole host of capabilities that we need today that are working on those things for the future.
So, Nina, there is a World Economic Forum came out a few months ago with a statistic that 65% of grammar school kids today will eventually have a job that doesn't exist today.
Yeah.
So everybody's worried about that. By the way, the Department of Labor at the dawn of the millennium in 1999 same statistic. So,
So what are some of those jobs?
so some of the data scientists is one of those jobs that, did not exist. We
Yeah.
weren't hiring them 10 years ago, and now you can't hire enough of them. There are a lot of other jobs. Also, the 1950 census, of the 250 jobs in that census, only one has gone away, and that is an elevator operator. Now, anyone from construction here will say, we still have elevator operators in construction, so that hasn't even really gone away. So I think you need to look, and as Marillyn said, this is about looking at what can be automated, what can be imitated, and then what jobs can be created. Because new jobs will be created, I assure you. And as we, as business leaders, look, if we have extra capital to deploy, we deploy it. Why wouldn't you do that with your human capital to make a competitive advantage? So it's something we need to think about differently.
Yeah, and you have a very positive view of all of this change. You think that jobs will come online to take the uptick from the loss of jobs.
Historically, that has been the case if you plan for it, though. So historically, technology and innovation, look, you can't stop innovation. We have to predict what's going to happen, where change is going to occur, but any economy that tries to stall innovation, and it's happened. It happened. Queen Elizabeth I tried to actually stop the gentleman who created a commercial knitting machine from getting the patent because she was concerned about what it would do to the knitting industry. It doesn't work. People were fearful that the existence of ATMs would replace bank tellers. Today, there are many, many more bank tellers than when ATMs were created in the 1980s. So I think that innovation is something that, as a country, we have to embrace, we want to embrace. We've always been the most innovative workforce and the most skilled workforce in the world. But we need to plan for it, and we need to make sure that the education is adequate, and we also need to anticipate the areas where people are likely going to be displaced and how we can retrain those workers with more relevant skills.
Are companies doing a good enough job of doing that?
A lot of companies are. This is actually being led by the private sector, and one of the things we've done in government is said, you know what, I've been amazed by the number of apprentices that companies like Lockheed Martin have taken on, where they'll go into a community college in an area where they have a heavy presence. They'll actually develop with that college a curriculum, give it to them, and say, we'll hire the students on the other end. So I'm not talking about four-year college. I'm talking about some level of post-secondary education, or even right out of high school. So what we've tried to do is lift regulations so you don't have to register every apprentice. So we learned a lot from the Germans when Chancellor Merkel was here, and they've done a great job in apprenticeship. A full 1/3 of their workforce went through the apprenticeship system, creating industry-wide credentials that are portable from state to state so that people have a certificate. Because it's not just high-tech jobs, it's also construction jobs that we have a massive shortage in. There aren't enough welders. So if we want to think about infrastructure, and if we want to think about rebuilding the cities that have been devastated, we need more skilled laborers, and we need more construction workers. So it's
How many companies here have apprenticeship programs? This is an interesting, interesting.
And I think that
Yeah.
if you look at the Business Roundtable, has been doing some great work in progress. And corporations like ours, Marillyn and mine, and many of you in this room, spend $164 billion a year in training. Think about that. So if we could partner in the PPPs, the public-private partnerships, to drive scalable learning for the skill sets we're looking for in the future, I think that's the most important thing we can do to support, Washington and the work of the future.
And so, Cathy, I love your story about showing your son the Jetsons because.
All right,
Okay, so tell us the Jetsons
my
story.
15-year-old son came to me. Now, this is a kid who plays Xbox and baseball, and that's about it. Not really interested in school. And he came to me and said, Mom, I'm afraid about something. And I said, what are you afraid of? And he said, that a robot's going to take over my job someday. And I said, wow, maybe there's hope for this kid. He's actually worried about something important. So I went into I've never met a machine with empathy and courage, and he debated me back on that. And then he said, Mom, I guess I just have to learn how to be a cobot. And I said, cobot, what's that? He said, coexist with a robot. And people call it collaborate with a robot. And I said, there is hope for this kid. But I then had him watch the Jetsons. So anybody who remembers that show, George Jetson worked for 2 hours a day. They walked the dog on a treadmill.
Right.
And Rosie the robot, we were all afraid of her because she was ending up doing everything.
Yeah.
And so I made him watch it, and he loved it, other than he said the computer graphic animation was terrible. But it was the 1960s when that show was. But it was a good lesson that, 40% of millennials are worried they're going to be replaced by automation.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of that, Marillyn, some of the industries that are in your world that are booming. Space,
Yes, and
autonomous space vehicles, and I'll get to cyber in a minute, but go ahead on that.
Sure. Well, on space, I mean, that's a great example. In fact, what we're trying to do is get to students very early and inspire them early. We've just rolled out a really innovative approach. We've taken an old school bus and turned it into the very first immersive virtual reality bus, where a student gets on that bus, a kindergartner gets on the bus, and rather than look out the windows now are screens of riding the bus on the surface of Mars. Because those children that are in those classrooms today are the ones that are going to be on Mars. We're working on the next deep space exploration vehicle, Orion. This will be the manned exploration that will go to Mars. With NASA is heading this up, and we're supporting that in the 2030s. So getting them excited about science and technology and engineering and things that they can do to be on Mars. And frankly, if you think about how much space technology has changed our lives, just the advanced discovery that's happened, it's learning how important it is to be a computer scientist, to support that activity, to be an engineer, to understand that they've got to know their math and science to do it. Other areas that we're working on are in autonomy and robotics. We have, our engineers have come up with a way that when you're flying an aircraft, in this case an F-16, it avoids collision. And many deaths in the past and fighter jets have been because a pilot has made the wrong decision. What happens is automation takes over that aircraft and prevents that collision.
But aren't we also seeing some fighter jets without a pilot?
Yes, unmanned as well. You bet.
Yeah.
Unmanned is also unmanned is an area not just in aircraft, but in undersea vehicles, in ground vehicles, and it is a lot of the repetitive tasks are going to be automated. We'll see a lot of robotics that happen in various arenas, but that's all positive because that then creates the opportunity for more technology and new growth and new economic prosperity.
And of course, the sort of conventional critics to space programs would say, why aren't you spending that time, that money, that innovation on infrastructure, for example, here on Earth?
Well, I think we are going to spend money on infrastructure as well as space, but we can't ignore that frontier. Not only is it important for advanced discovery, it's also important for national security. If you look at other countries around the world, there are 70 countries that are engaged in the space domain, and we have to be on top of that as a nation to make sure that we protect our assets, protect our citizens, both in that domain of space as well as in other domains, and take advantage of what we can do in space and that exploration to bring back things that make our lives better on Earth.
And you just gave $5 million to the University of Alabama for a cybersecurity program, so you obviously see that as something that you're concerned about, but also obviously something that we should train workers for.
Yes, as a personal gift, I'm an alma mater of University of Alabama, Roll Tide, for those of you that are out there. But giving back to a school that gave me so much, I realized that a lot of jobs in the future are going to be business intelligence, data intelligence. They're going to be around data science, cybersecurity. So the gift that I gave to the University of Alabama was to help get students ready for those jobs that are out there. Today, there are zero unemployment in cybersecurity. There's about over 1 million jobs that are gone wanting, jobs that are open, and by 2021, there'll be 3.1 million jobs open in cybersecurity. So it's opportunities for our schools to focus on that area to get students ready to focus on cyber.
Okay, here's where all three of you need to convince me. There are those folks who've been left behind, particularly in rural communities, particularly core Trump voters, who've been left behind, who don't have college degrees, left behind in this economy, have left the workforce, are middle-aged, left the workforce, who live in counties where opioid addiction rates are extremely high. Convince me that you're going to get those folks back in the workforce or that their kids are going to be set up for these kinds of jobs.
Well, I think what you mentioned is an extremely important fact, because when I talked about the 6 million jobs that are vacant and going unfilled, in large part it's due to a skill gap, but in large part it's due to the opioid problem that we have across this country. And it is an epidemic at the highest level. And you see that in terms of having some of the lowest workforce participation rates for
Historic.
adult males in prime working age.
Right.
So this is a major problem as we think about treatment, as we think about innovative treatment. Dr. Collins at NIH is doing some amazing things around non-addictive pain treatments to make sure and to help think about ways to not allow the next wave. Obviously, ensuring that drugs aren't coming into this country, and then figuring out effective treatments for those people who are addicted, and obviously training them for the jobs that are available.
Kathy, how do you reach that population?
I think it's, access to education, then jobs, then healthcare altogether, right?
But if you're 55 years old, I don't think access to education.
Well, I was saying at the younger levels.
Yeah.
But, for a generation, not everybody's going to be a coder, not everyone's going to have a STEM degree. So that's why we do need to figure out what's been termed this new collar type of job, where it is someone who's been reskilled or upskilled. And I think Lockheed and SAP and 3M are doing some amazing things, as well as many of the companies in this audience, to drive that $164 billion that's being spent to drive the skills of that worker. But I do think, as we think about innovation and the whole smart cities and smart nations, if we can drive smart cities to a smart nation, it gives access to those rural areas, to different jobs, to different access to healthcare, clean water, energy, so that it takes it out of the issues that Ivanka was describing. So I think it really is it's a formula.
Customer service is another big opportunity. A lot of companies are making the choice to bring customer service and call centers back to the United States, even though it's more expensive here because of quality considerations. And that is work that has the potential, and companies are experimenting with doing it remotely. So you can look at areas of the country that have had large displacements of their workforce because particular industries have gone under, plants have closed, and that represents a viable opportunity. But there is no one-size-fits-all solution. And this is where this room is so important to be part of the conversation. And how can they contribute to worker retraining, as well as to taking on and training our younger apprentices with those skill sets.
So let's talk about Washington for a minute, because that is in the title of our session. Washington has a miserable record on all of this. I mean, it's billions spent per year on job training that crosses 17 agencies, and half of them are babysitting services. It's just truly, it hasn't worked.
And there's no metrics to measure.
And so Ivanka, you've come in and you've taken a lot of this on and wanted to make an issue, to make some progress on this. Where do you feel like you've made progress? I mean, give us some specific examples where I know you are an advocate of paid family leave, for example, which is still, so where have you made progress personally?
Well, that's sort of a broader discussion around the administration's working family agenda and the recognition that the vast majority of homes in this country are dual income, which is relatively new phenomenon. It's been the past several decades that we've seen the shift start to take place, and we have to make sure that as a country, our policies align with our values, work and family. And we have to support the American worker, and we have to support the American family, and we have to support the American child. So when you think about something like paid family leave, especially for those least likely to have access to it from the private sector, and it's incredible what companies like Deloitte are doing, but likely your workforce is being paid much more than the average workforce, where it's much less likely to receive it. So the people who need it the least are most likely to get it from the private sector, and the people who need some form of paid leave and job security, if they're taking care of an adult dependent or after the birth of the child, are least likely to get it.
So we're still, this is an issue you're still pushing and still...
I'm incredibly focused on it. So I think the lack of affordable Childcare is an enormous prohibitant to women in the workplace, to all parents, but disproportionately women, as we are the most likely to leave the workforce to provide unpaid care, oftentimes because we don't have an alternative because of the high cost of childcare. This is something that we're looking to tackle as part of tax reform. A dramatic expansion of the existing child tax credit is one of the ways in which we're doing that, removing the marriage penalty, which is another. Paid family leave will be separate legislation. But look, FMLA was passed in 1993, and it hasn't changed since.
Right.
So this is not easy. If it's easy, it would have been done
Right.
already.
So we've
and
run-
my
yeah.
job, I guess, I view my role in this as convening and trying to get people to talk, bring people to the table, expose this issue to people who have not previously
Right.
thought or considered it.
So
and
we've run
hopefully
out of
make
time, so
progress.
I'm going to ask Marillyn and Cathy to end this by giving
Yeah.
2-sentence requests to the President of the United States on this issue.
Well, I would say that, the question that you ask of Ivanka, I think the president, the administration has done some things that are already making a difference. Work with the workforce development, with apprenticeships, helping businesses to support that, with the computer science education and STEM. So we're on a path. The point is that we need to raise awareness. Technology is changing rapidly. We need to accept the fact that we are all going to need to be continuously learning and reskilling throughout our lives, and that it's okay that we build that kind of education in our workplace, and that we're all about making sure that people can keep up with the changing technology to continue to drive growth.
Cathy, I've got the hook. One second.
Yes,
You literally have one sentence.
The passion for learning is something that we need public-private partnership around to drive results.
Ladies, thank you all so much.
you.
And enjoy your dinner, everybody.